Yeah, I like to ask you about geopolitics. It's good that you brought that up. Biden's administration, what's he going to do with his relationship, with our relationship with China, with Iran, Iraq, the Middle East, Syria? What's going to happen to all these different hotspots that we were in? And now, of course, the trade war is, people stopped talking about the trade war after COVID, but it's still ongoing. Let's just don't forget that.
Well, let's talk a little about the trade war. Hey, did you
Yeah.
see that latest deficit the United States just had and China's imports? Yeah, it just hit I think like a 24-year, something high. That's how, so the trade war meant nothing. America lost the trade war. One of our top trends for 2021, China 2021. The 20th century was the American century. The 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. The business of China is business. The business of America is war. Hey, they just passed that budget a little while ago, that defense budget in the United States, as everything's going down, one of the biggest defense budget and the biggest one. Plus, when you put in the whole intelligence complex into it, intelligence, of course, is an oxymoron considering what they do. It's over $1 trillion, $1.3 trillion. China's investing all over the world, from South America to across Asia, around the world, buying up ports everywhere. So, and you look also in 2020, when you're going to look at the GDPs of every major nation, they'll all be negative except one, China. China's going to have positive GDP growth in 2020 as the rest of the world went down. So we're looking at a China takeover. And again, China takeover in many ways. They used to make fun of the people in China for wearing these things all the time. But of course, the reason they're wearing them is because of air pollution. Only 1.5 million people die each year in China from air polluted related diseases. 1.67 just reported out of India. But we got to watch the COVID, right? Okay. I'm mentioning this because when I say the Chinese way, look at the dictates that have happened all over in the so-called democracies in the Western worlds, where now you have leaders telling you what to do, and constitutions and Bill of Rights mean nothing. These aren't laws passed. They're dictates. Going back to China. China is going to be the powerhouse of the 21st century. We're looking at the United States now. And when you look at the dollar as well, it's like looking at England around 1920, after World War II, or one rather. And the pound goes down, the dollar goes up. While the yuan right now only accounts for about 3% of global trade, we see that becoming a powerhouse currency in the future, and the dollar going down.
When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to the channel. My name is Jose Prado. Please share this information with your friends and family. Please help us grow, because this is the third video, or technically the second video from the last podcast that I shared with you this week. And now we're going to be moving on to the how the pandemic, or actually how this monetary policy is really going to affect the country nationwide, rather than to the individual, the citizens, like I did on the previous podcast. This is going to be, we're going to be looking at the greater picture on how everything is going to go down with the country. Now, this podcast is sponsored by you through the ManMadeSurvival store, so I really appreciate it if you could help us out by making a purchase, making a donation, whichever one you want to do. It will really help us to be able to share this information with your friends and family. Or if you want to do the free way to, help us grow, would be to share these with your friends and family all throughout your social media. So I would really appreciate it if you would do that for us. All right, because again, the information that we share with you is very important, especially the prepping part, because we have to get prepared for everything that's going to happen. Now, what I mentioned in the previous podcast is that we have to change the way that we look at prepping. And the reason that we have to look at it in a different light is because a lot of people have always prepped for that one event that's going to happen. And once that is resolved, then everything goes back to normal. And we know from what we have gathered, the data that we have gathered from real life events, such as Venezuela, Iraq, and the endless wars, and all these other things that happen in Africa with famine and stuff like that. It doesn't just last a couple of weeks and then everything goes back to normal. You know, we live happily ever after. Those things happen slowly in increments, and they last a very long time. Venezuela has been in economic collapse status for over 8 years. Africa, for the longest time that they have always struggled with hunger. Mexico and places down south, they have always been plagued with violence. So those are the things that we have to look at, and no longer wait for that one event that's going to happen, but rather make it into a way of life that we're going to be able to outlast our preps. That even if the disaster that happens outlasts our initial preps, it's not going to outlast our self-reliance. Right? So that is the goal that we're eventually going to have to get to. Now, in the previous podcast, I mentioned our mission because our mission has changed. All right, our mission is to redefine and restore the prepper reputation, to create a community of well-prepared, selfless individuals around the world, and to become a refuge for the unprepared. Not politically motivated, but all united under Jesus Christ. And the reason that I say that is because we have to make sure that our spiritual life is in order. We all sin. We all have sins that we don't like doing, that we wish we were not slaves from. But nonetheless, we're there, but we are conscious of the things that we do. So we have to make sure that we're prepared physically and we're prepared spiritually. So please share this information with your friends and family and share on your social media. Visit our store, ManMadeSurvivalStore.com. You can make all the purchases for your preps on there, and it's going to help you in the long run. All right, so the first thing that I want to give you is a headline that is going to really make you understand where wealth comes from and how it has been created in the past several years, and technically for decades now. You can take it back to the 80s, 90s, however long, but once you really understand how wealth is created, you're going to see that it's a big trap for everyone around the world. And that is the reason why right now we're seeing the type of deficits or debt that the United States is accumulating, but not just us, all the countries all around the world. So that's why when I mentioned that people are going to have to flee the United States, or they're going to desire to flee the United States, they have to make sure that all their plans are in place right now, because all the other countries, they're going through their own economic collapse. They're going through their own COVID-19 lockdowns. They're going through their own issues that if people who are thinking about fleeing, they already have something set up over there where they think that their refuge is going to be, then they're going to have a very difficult time, and they're going to wish they were here in the place that they knew, and they would have made or have taken the steps to where they were going to be prepared for something like this to go down. All right, so the headline comes from SeekingAlpha.com, and it says, Gold. The widening wealth gap in America is the biggest bull trap in history. Greater ceases moving into a world economy that fuels global debt, which in turn fuels global wealth. Total global financial wealth is up almost 3 times from $80 trillion to $225 trillion from 1990 to 2020. But the key is that wealth is in US dollar denominated assets. This currency is moving in an inflationary spiral, which is caused by printing money in the form of stimulus to prevent an economic collapse. During this time, global debt went from 80 trillion in 1990 to 277 trillion today. Global debt has gone up 246%, while global financial wealth has gone up 181%. All right, so one of the things that you're going to notice in these articles that I'm going to be showing you today, which of course this article continues, is that they are saying that the reason that they're printing money is to avoid an economic collapse, which is of course ironic because the more money that you print, the worse the collapse is going to be. So in reality, if they were just to let it fall where, the initial collapse would happen, it would not be such a great magnitude as it would be now that they have printed even more money to prop it up. That means that it's higher up, the debt is higher up, and it has a greater distance to fall. So that is why it's important for us to pay attention to these little details that is really telling us the whole story. Now, before I continue with the same article, I want you to pay attention to the numbers that they're saying. In the 1990s, wealth was 80 trillion and it went up to 225 trillion. All right, that's a big increase in the total wealth, right? But here's the catch: the only reason that we have so much wealth is because we have even greater debt. All right, so in the 1990s, the global debt was 80 trillion and it went up to 277 trillion. So the debt has outpaced the wealth gains. And even if there was a total collapse where the entire wealth was put into the debt, that means that we would still be approximately about $50 trillion in debt. So that's why it's important for us to pay attention to these little details, because even though the wealth sounds like it's a lot, that it's on a good positive note, and a great positive note, the debt is even worse and it's even greater than the wealth all put together. And that means that all the wealth from Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Bezos, and everybody else around the world, all the millionaires, billionaires, and everybody else in between, everyone will have to pay the money into it, and there will still be $50 trillion in debt. All right. So that's why it's important for us to know these little details. So the article goes on to say, it appears we're looking at a total debasement of the fiat currencies because world debt is unsustainable. Some countries are running debt levels versus GDP of 120% or 130%. We only stayed afloat because interest rates are near zero. The only thing that has maintained its purchasing power for thousands of years is gold. Prepare for tremendous volatility over the next few months and years as we see unlimited amounts of stimulus coming to the economy. As currencies collapse, we will first see inflation and possibly hyperinflation. Okay, so that is the next thing, the hyperinflation. All right, I want to show you a chart from the U.S. Debt clock, and it shows really the debt of all the countries put together. Now, as you've seen on the screen, the first one is the United States. The population is 330,876,453. The national debt, as of right now, not including the omnibus bill from January, it says $27.831 trillion. GDP, which is the gross domestic product, is $21.29 trillion. Public debt to GDP ratio is 101.15%, and external debt to GDP ratio is 126.34%. All right, so that means that we're spending more money, over 100% more money that we're bringing in. Okay, so that in the long run is not going to last very long. The way that you can think about it is how you spend money with your credit card. Even though your credit card is not tapped out yet, eventually you're going to have to pay the bill. And if you don't have a job, if you're broke, if you cannot make the payment, that's going to make the credit card collapse, and you will no longer be able to, to draw money from it, draw debt from it. It's exactly the same way with the economies around the world. The next big one is China. The population is 1,440,342,576. Pay attention to the ratios. Their national debt right now is only $7.945 trillion. Of course, that's a lot of money, but not compared to the United States. The GDP for China, it's $14.804 trillion. Public debt to GDP ratio is only 53.63%. That means half of their debt, they're still saving half of that money. And external debt to GDP ratio is even lower. This 12.78%. So they have a lot of positive in their economy. Even though these numbers are in red, that means that they still have money in their pocket, and it would be easier for them to pay it off. Okay? The next one that I want to show you really is all the way down here with Russia, which of course that's the third biggest nuclear power or the superpower around the world. We have to also look at their numbers because it's going to be important down the road. And it's going to be something important that we're going to discuss in this podcast, so pay attention. Russia has a population of 146,019,527. The national debt is only $305 billion, which compared to the United States is nothing at all. Their gross domestic product, it's $1.666 trillion. So that means that they have a lot more money in their pocket that they're spending. Let's look at their public debt to GDP ratio. It's only 18.31%, and their external debt to GDP ratio is only 38.36%. That means that they're being frugal with their money. They're not spending as much on social programs and doing all these things around the world as the United States is, or even China. They're saving a little bit more money than China, although they do have way less population. The point is that Russia is in the positives, and so is China, okay? Now, all these other countries, of course, they have bigger economies, but they're not the superpowers around the world, and they're the ones that we mainly focus on in this channel. I do want to show you, however, our friends, one or two of our friends, which the one I want to start with is the UK. The UK has $3.569 trillion in debt. Their GDP is 3.287, and their public and external ratios are very big. Public is 108.58, and external is 311.32. And before I continue to bore you with the numbers, that is a big problem later on for us, because remember, they're one of our main allies, and they're also in NATO. As you see right here at the very last, without going through it, Canada is also in a very big bad spot, and Mexico not so much, but we cannot really rely on them. All right, so that is pretty much it on that. And what the article that I read to you a minute ago said that we're going to experience hyperinflation. Well, eventually all of these currencies are going to collapse. And the ones who have the savings and are backed up by gold, they're the ones that are going to be propped up later on. Now, there's two countries that we have to pay attention to, because Russia and China both have bought tons and tons and tons of gold in previous years. So much so that it really alarmed the Fed, the government too, wondering what they were doing. And of course, later on it came out that they're working on creating a type of system, kind of like the SWIFT system that we have in the United States, which is, the banking system that we have to be able to make transactions between countries, which is the tool that we have that we create, or that we have created, to make the United States dollar the world's reserve currency. Once other countries such as Russia and China can dethrone the United States from being the world reserve currency, that's going to collapse their economy very, very bad. And that's going to prop up China, which is the one that they're really shooting for, to be the top dog of the world. And they're going to have the reserve currency status. And they're the ones who are going to dictate things that are going to happen all around the world, pretty much like we do now. All right, so the next article that I have for you is The Destructive Force and Failure of QE. That's from Zero Hedge. This article concludes that quantitative easing as a means of stimulating economies and financial governments' deficits will fail. The underlying assumption is that the transmission of additional money to non-banks in order to inflate financial assets and for banks to cover government finances will become too great in 2021 for it to succeed without undermining fiat currencies and financial markets. Admittedly, this option stands in stark contrast to the common Keynesian view that once COVID is over, economies will start to grow again. Having exhausted the reduction of interest rates as the principal means of economic stimulus, central banks, and especially the Fed, have embarked on pure monetary inflation. Before the end of 2019, that became the driving force behind the Fed's monetary policy. Since March 2020, the objective behind QE altered again to financing the U.S. government's budget deficit. In this current fiscal year, just to fund the budget deficits and in the absence of net foreign demand for U.S. treasuries, QE is likely to escalate to a monthly average of $450 billion. Almost impossible with a stable exchange rate, but with the dollar being sold down the foreign exchange and for commodities, the everything dollar bubble will almost certainly collapse. Okay, so the reason that is important is because it's letting you know, all right, this article is letting you know the steps that the governments are taking with printing so much money that eventually is not going to be sustainable anymore and is going to collapse everywhere. The United States dollar is going to collapse. That's going to create a panic in all the governments around the world. They're going to try to look for that one currency that is still strong. They're going to shift all of that towards that currency, right? They're going to exchange their money for that currency that's going to be propped up. And that's how they're going to try to continue to be able to stay afloat, okay? But we understand now, right, through all this that I've shared with you, all the articles that we've read, everything that we have, learned up to this point, is that when that date happens, all the currencies are going to collapse, and they're going to have to look for a new way to create a currency, or at least get a different currency that's going to be backed up by something. We don't know what's going to be yet. Preferably, it's going to be gold, because the IMF has said in the past that they're going to have to buy all the gold that they can, because that's going to be because once the collapse happens, that's going to be the tool that they're going to need in order for them to bring a different type of currency. Right now, of course, there's speculations out there on how the next currency is going to look like, and of course, it's going to have to be a currency that is digital, whether it's a cryptocurrency or it's whatever the system that they have now. Just instead of issuing fiat, this is going to be numbers in the computer. But the reason that they want to do that, of course, is because now they can track every single transaction that you make, and they're going to be able to tax it accordingly. So that is the reason why they want to have they want the next currency to be 100% digital, right? Because they can already track everything you do with your credit card and your debit card. But when you have cash with you, when you make a cash payment, they don't know exactly what you bought, or they don't know exactly who you gave it to, and whether or not it's taxable. That is the reason why they want to go that route. So now that all of this is prone to be collapsing in the next few months, years, however long it may take, they're going to go ahead and put everything that they have in place for a new reserve digital currency to be propped up. And more than likely it's going to be China, okay? Because that's what I'm going to show you here in the next few headlines. Now, with all of this spending that we're talking about, what I mentioned previously is that when is the collapse going to happen? I mean, we don't know. With everything that we have learned up until now, the collapse should already happen, but it has not happened yet. Because it's been propped up, because interest rates are being cut down, because this is happening, that's happening, but eventually it's going to happen. Now, the next headline that I have for you is important because the IMF is telling the countries to spend money. But again, pay attention why, okay? That is the reason why I chose this to put it in the podcast and the previous one as well. But it goes along the same lines. This one's from Reuters. Spend as much as you can, IMF head urges governments worldwide. In terms of policies for right now, very unusual for the IMF. Starting in March, I would go out and I would say, please spend. Spend as much as you can and then spend a little bit more. I continue to advocate for monetary policy accommodations and fiscal policies that protect the economy from collapsing at a time when we are on purpose restricting both production and consumption, end quote. Do you catch that? They are saying that the reason that people, or not people, but governments need to spend more money, need to print more money, need to do all of this is because things will have already collapsed. Especially right now with all the economies around the world who are locked down. They're not letting people work. They're not letting production and consumption happen. But listen to it. This is this is the other headline that is letting you know that the reason that they're doing all this money printing is because they know it would have already collapsed. So if they're propping it up with fake money, with cheap money, that means that they're making the collapse even stronger, even worse. That is the reason why we have to shift our prepping priorities, because this is going to be one of those things that's going to last a very long time. It's not just going to be several months. It's not just going to be several weeks. It's going to go on for years. until they feel like bringing out the other currencies. Right? That is the reason why we have to pay attention right now. We have to shift our priorities from just stocking up stuff, just buying up stuff, storing it somewhere, to making a very way of life to be self-sufficient, to be self-sustained. That means that your property that you buy is going to have water running through it 24/7, whether it's from a creek, a river, a stream, whatever it is. It has to be enough water to water your plants, water your animals, and for you to consume and bathe. All right? And that means that it has to run 24/7, 365, and it doesn't technically have to rely on rain. Because if there's a time where it doesn't rain a lot, that means that stream is going to dry up. The point is that you have to find a property. You have to change your way of life. You have to change where you live. You have to change all these little details that is going to put you in a position where you're going to be able to be self-sufficient without government help, without currency help later down the road. Again, I remind you that Venezuela has been in their economic collapse for over 7 years, over 8 years. Zimbabwe has been a very long time as well. Argentina has been several years now. So that is why it's important for us to think and shift the ways that we do things. All right? That's what we have to make sure that we pay attention to the little details in these articles. We bring them out and we show them to our friends and family. That's why I want to show you this podcast. I want to show you these headlines in this podcast, because people are focusing more in that. She said that they want people to spend more money, and they want countries to spend more money. But why? The reason is because they don't want it to collapse, at least not yet. Because if they were to stop the money printing, it would already collapse. If we were to raise the interest rates, it would already collapse. If we would do all these several little things that's going to happen, or that could happen, we have already collapsed. Are you prepared for the economy to collapse right now? Think about that. For however many bug out bags that you have, for however much stored food you have, can you withstand an 8-year economic collapse? Could you? With the property that you live in, could you do it? With the livestock that you have right now, could you do it? Some preppers, they only stocked up on food. They only focus on stocking up 25-year shelf life food. But they have no plan of resupplying. They don't have a garden. They've never had a garden. They never have livestock. They don't even have a chicken coop or, anywhere to house any type of animal. But yet they say that they're prepared. When this type of scenarios or this type of things that we're living are going to be things that are going to last a very long time. Now, again, I'll remind you from what I did the podcast on the Great Reset. What did they say? What did I bring you the information about? That they're saying that the United States in the next 10 years will no longer be a superpower. That pretty much everything's going to be controlled by 10 or more countries. The point is that if we're no longer the superpower, that means that we're no longer the reserve currency of the world. That means that we have hyperinflation. And because of all the things that is happening right now with Biden, everything's going to be more expensive. All right, I want to touch on the Keystone Pipeline real quick, because even though that wiped out several thousand jobs, that is not the only thing you have to worry about. It's going to raise the price of gas, right? Yes, we all know that. It's pretty much a given. But also what people are not understanding, or they're not thinking about beyond the gas prices, is that if it's raising the gas prices for the farmers, guess what's going to happen to the food? It's going to go up as well, because farmers are going to need all that gas to run all those big old tractors that they have. And if they can no longer afford it because it's really high, guess what? Food prices are going to go up. Even if there's no hyperinflation, the simple fact that the price of gas went up, that means that the tractors are going to be more expensive to run, meaning that they're going to have to offset the rising in the price onto the consumer. Therefore, that means that in the grocery stores is going to raise it even more. So even if there's no hyperinflation because of an economic collapse, the policies that Biden is implementing right now, with the Green New Deal and all those other ones, that's going to be raising the price of everything without hyperinflation, we're already going to have a difficult life ahead of us. Now, we have an economic collapse on top of that. How much worse are things going to be? That is the reason why I keep saying, and now we have changed our mission statement, that we're going to have to make sure that we come together as a community, that we become the refuge for the unprepared. Because there's going to be millions and millions of people, probably billions of people unprepared for all of this to happen. That's why we have to make sure that we're the responsible community of preppers who are going to be helping out later. Because that's another thing about the prepper community. It's very selfish. You'll know that in every podcast and every other prepper talking about an economic collapse, they're always telling you to worry about yourself, not even your immediate family members, that you only worry about yourself, and whoever comes to your door, you're going to turn away or you're going to shoot them out of there, right? They're saying that you're going to have to be locked down, ready to go, and if anybody tries to knock at your door, that you just blast them away. That is not how things are going to be, all right? I come from a poor country where poverty is there 24/7. People knock on people's doors and they don't get blasted away, all right? People do turn other people away, but it's not the way that preppers fantasize about. Or at least it's not going to be to that extreme. At least not for a while, okay? The point is that we have to make sure that we don't just rely on ourselves. That we don't just say that, you know, me and my spouse are going to be the ones that are going to survive the entire apocalypse. We have to make sure that we come together in an alliance, right? Because if we don't come together in an alliance, we're not going to make it very far. And the things that we are seeing ahead of us are going to be a lot more difficult if we deal with them individually. I really do see us going into a type of community farm. I think community farms are going to start popping up again all throughout the country, especially for the purpose who foresaw this coming, and they have put everything in place to make sure that that happens. Because you are not going to be able to do, 10 acres worth of farmland, but if you have 100 people come together to make sure that they have put in the work to make sure that they can eat later on, it's going to be a lot easier to do that. And you can grow a lot of food in 10 acres. A lot of food. You can feed a lot of people with it. You can store a lot for the future. But the point is that we have to come together as a community. That is the reason why we have to do it. Now, if the governments are telling us right now that the reason that they are propping all this money is because they think that the collapse will have already happened, then how much faster do we have to prepare? Because they have been printing money for many, many years now. We don't know how many more they're going to be able to. Okay, the Biden administration has been forecasted to print like $10 trillion in the next 4 years. So that is the reason why we have to make sure we hurry up now. Okay, because we have to know that we are set for later. I want to finish this podcast with the next two headlines. China set to topple the U.S. as biggest economy sooner after the virus. That's from yahoo.com. The second one is this. China urged to tap RCEP trade deal for future digital payment system as U.S. sanctions loom. That's from the South China Morning Post. And on this article, it has a lot of information, but I wanted to get this quote because you really don't have to read the entire article once you read this quote, because it really projects what they're planning for the future. The dependence on the US dollar for international transactions has not allowed the Chinese yuan to fulfill its market potential. Hence, China began to push towards a monetary system that would encourage increased global adoption of its native currency. In other words, because the dollar's in the way, the yuan could be a lot greater, and it could be more widely adopted all throughout the world. If the United States dollar becomes dethroned and the yuan is placed on there, that means that they're going to have a lot more. They're going to have a lot more influence all throughout the world. Now they're the ones who are going to have the sanction power. They're the ones who are going to dictate what goes around the world. They're going to be the ones that if they don't like something, they're going to sanction it. Kind of like the United States is doing right now. I have said in the past that what we're doing right now, sanctioning countries, is going to happen to us later on. Because right now we sanction anybody we don't like. If Iran does something we don't like, sanction. If China does something we don't like, sanction. If Russia does something that we don't like, sanction. That is the strongest tool we have outside of war. Because it really puts a lot of economic pressure on a country. Because of the sanctions in Iran, they had an economic collapse type. The same thing with other countries. Because of the sanctions, Russia has actually threatened war over it. Because of the economic sanctions, China has done the same. So once we are dethroned from being the world's reserve currency, China and Russia, mainly China, are going to have the power to sanction us whenever we do something we don't like, or even for revenge. Actually, when the Trump administration got out, China did take revenge. They sanctioned Pompeo, I think Trump, and other people. And that was their revenge. They sanctioned them. Because now the Biden administration had come in. That means that Trump had no more say into the matter. And all the people that helped Trump, pretty much be very tough on China, now they're getting the payback from China. So we have done all this throughout the years. What's going to happen once they're on top? They're going to do exactly the same thing. All right, so I want to leave this podcast with this video of Joel Salente and pay very close attention to what he said, because it's really going to set the tone for the next decade, for the next century, for a long time, pretty much. All right. So I want to remind you to share this podcast with your friends and family. Please be our extended arm. Help us reach more people. This podcast has grown from several hundred to several thousand, a little bit under 10,000. On brighteon.com, we have over 21,000 views put together. On YouTube, it's about 40,000. In all these other platforms, it's in the hundreds, several thousands. So this podcast is growing. It's all thanks to you. But I really need your help to make it even bigger, to reach out more people, to have this community of preppers being built that's going to withstand whatever comes our way. All right. And I can only do that with your help, sharing it through your social media. It's absolutely free. You already do it. You already share pictures. You already share videos. You already share articles. Make this one of those videos that you share so we can get more people watching us. All right. Again, I want to thank you very much. I want to leave you with this video. Remember, always ready.
Yeah, I like to ask you about geopolitics. It's good that you brought that up. Biden's administration, what's he going to do with his relationship, with our relationship with China, with Iran, Iraq, the Middle East, Syria? What's going to happen to all these different hotspots that we were in? And now, of course, the trade war people stopped talking about the trade war after COVID, but it's still ongoing. Let's just don't forget that.
Well, let's talk a little about the trade war. Hey, did you see that latest deficit the United States just had and China's imports? Yeah, it just hit I think a 24-year, something high. That's how. So the trade war meant nothing. America lost the trade war. One of our top trends for 2021, China 2021. The 20th century was the American century. The 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. The business of China is business. The business of America is war. Hey, they just passed that budget a little while ago, that defense budget in the United States, as everything's going down, one of the biggest defense budget and the biggest one. Plus, when you put in the whole intelligence complex into it, intelligence, of course, is an oxymoron, considering what they do. It's over $1 trillion, $1.3 trillion. China's investing all over the world, from South America to across Asia, around the world, buying up ports everywhere. So, and you look also in 2020, when you're going to look at the GDPs of every major nation, they'll all be negative except one, China. China's going to have positive GDP growth in 2020 as the rest of the world went down. So we're looking at a China takeover. And again, China takeover in many ways. They used to make fun of the people in China for wearing these things all the time. But of course, the reason they're wearing them is because of air pollution. Only 1.5 million people die each year in China from air polluted related diseases. 1.67 just reported out of India. But we got to watch the COVID, right? Okay. I'm mentioning this because when I say the Chinese way, Look at the dictates that have happened all over in the so-called democracies in the Western worlds, where now you have leaders telling you what to do, and constitutions and Bill of Rights mean nothing. These aren't laws passed. They're dictates. Going back to China. China is going to be the powerhouse of the 21st century. We're looking at the United States now, and when you look at the dollar as well, it's like looking at England around 1920, after World War II, or one rather. And the pound goes down, the dollar goes up. While the yuan right now only accounts for about 3% of global trade, we see that becoming a powerhouse currency in the future, and the dollar going down.
The Man-Made Survival Show.